We're going to discuss 7 unusual, unique, outrageous, wild aspects of Jewish history. We're going to see that each one of these 7 wonders of Jewish history, first of all, defies all logic. Makes no sense. Secondly, we're going to see that the 7 wonders of Jewish history contradict each other. And most incredibly, each one was predicted in the Torah thousands of years ago. To begin, when was the Torah written? So, it's a trick question. We believe 2,000 years before the world was created, whatever that means. Discuss it later on. The Torah was given, as we understand it, 3,300 years ago. Hashem appeared to the Jewish people on Har Sinai. Academicians who are not convinced of the divine origin of the Torah, they admit that the Torah is at least 2,400 years old. That's because 2,400 years ago, we have documentation of the very first Sefer Torah that was introduced to the modern world, the secular world, in the form of the Septuagint. Okay, so everyone agrees the Torah is at least 2,400 years old. We maintain that it was in fact given 3,300 years old. But the truth is that Mamad Shafar doesn't really make a difference. We'll see that the predictions that are contained in the Torah came long before their fulfillment. The class is entitled 7 Wonders. What is a wonder? If you were to open the dictionary, the definition that pops out is miracle. A wonder is a miracle. Well, what is a miracle? I'm sure the Rebbeim taught you the Ramban, the last parsha, the end of Parshas Bo. Everything's a miracle. So, we don't view everything as a miracle. Those things that we're used to, those things that we're accustomed to, we call that a miracle. If I take you outside and show you a palm tree, no one's going to say, whoa, what a miracle! Food comes from the ground, food comes from a tree. We're used to that, we call that nature. But if I take you outside and show you marzipan falling from heaven, we would all agree that that was a miracle. If we would rewind the clock a few thousand years, and we were in the desert, we were born in the desert, we left Egypt, we're eating 3 meals a day, or at least 2. Today was the day, Parshas Haman for Parnasa. If I would tell you that marzipan fell from heaven, you would say, of course, that's all we eat is marzipan from heaven, every day. That's what we eat. That's what we call the man. If I would tell you, yeah, but there's food that comes from the ground, you'd say, I never heard of such a thing. And when we finally get into Eretz Yisrael, for the very first time in our lives, we're seeing food coming from the ground, we would say, wow, that's a miracle. So, miracles and wonders are really dependent upon the norms and depending on what we're used to. They're subjective. As we discuss these 7 wonders and 7 miracles of Jewish history, I want you to ask yourselves 3 questions. 1, are these things in fact wonders? Are they out of the ordinary? 2, could these things have logically been predicted thousands of years ago? 3, if human beings are writing the Torah, that means there is no Jewish people. We are creating the Jewish people from scratch. We put together this constitution. It's a country club. We have a list of rules and regulations. And this is our document. We are rallying around this document that we call the Torah. And therefore, if we're starting out from scratch, we would want to present a document that is an effective advertising campaign that's going to draw adherents to our newfound religion. So as we discuss these 7 wonders, we have to ask ourselves, these things that are predicted in the Torah, is this an effective advertising campaign, and is it going to want to make people join our new group of people? So again, we're going to ask 3 questions. Are they out of the ordinary? 2, could these things have logically predicted thousands of years ago? And is this an effective advertising campaign? Let's go back to France, 17th century, the court of Louis XIV. Louis XIV was an agnostic, which means he wasn't sure if there was God. And he had a good friend named Blaise Pascal, who aside from being a famous mathematician, was a Christian spiritual philosopher. And they used to debate the existence of God. On one occasion, Pascal went on a 45-minute, very boring shiur to prove to the king the existence of a supernatural being, and the king was bored. He wasn't following. He had enough. And finally, he turns to his Rebbe, Pascal, and he says, bottom line, standing on one foot in one sentence or less, can you prove to me the existence of the supernatural, of a God? Pascal's response, the Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews. What's so supernatural about us? How do we prove the existence of God? How do we prove the supernatural? So the first of our 7 wonders is that the Jews are the eternal people. Whereas the mighty Babylonians destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash, the Romans destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash, the Greeks, the Egyptians, all the superpowers of the world, they've all disappeared. All the holidays commemorate our winning over these superpowers, and they're all gone. Yet thousands of years later, here we are sitting in this auditorium. We are still here. That's because we are the eternal nation. Did everyone get their daf? Okay. If you're not convinced that this is such a big deal, look at the article in the back by Mark Twain. Third paragraph, Mark Twain writes, okay, 1898. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out. And they sit in twilight now or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? We will get back to Mark Twain's question a little bit later. But Mark Twain finds this to be quite noteworthy. And if you turn back to side 1, we see that this is what the Torah tells us in quote number 1. Hashem tells Abraham, I'm not going to read through the Hebrew, but you'll see the underlined words. Hashem is making with Abraham Avinu a bris olam, an eternal covenant between him and his descendants after us. We are the eternal people. And that is wonder number 1. The Torah tells us that we're going to be the eternal people, and we haven't reached eternity yet. But here we are, still talking about it. Now maybe the Torah will cover its back, and maybe there's some escape clause. It's a big Torah. There's a lot of Hebrew words in there. And maybe there's some escape clause that will give the author of the book some way out. When people come with their money back, you know, those Jews disappeared. You said they wouldn't. This is a farce. I want my money back. So maybe there's some hidden escape clause to explain why at some point the Jews will disappear. If you look at quote number 2 from Vayikra, the end of Vayikra, the Tochacha, that talks about the terrible troubles that will befall the Jewish people if they don't do what they're supposed to do. So one would think that the Jews will disappear. But yet Hashem writes in there, in the Tochacha, with all the terrible tzaras that the Jews are going to experience, and we've experienced every single one. The Torah there says, Lo ma'astim, lo ga'altim l'chalosam. I will not destroy them. V'zacharti lahem bris rishonim. I will always remember the bris that I made with Abraham Avinu. The Jews are here forever. Regardless of whether they follow the Torah or they do not follow the Torah, there will always be a Jewish people. And you see this even more strongly in quote number 3 from Yirmiyahu. This is my favorite quote. There, the Pasuk says that as long as there are laws of nature, the Jewish people will be here. There's a sun, there's a moon, there are stars, the Jews will stick around. And here we are. Okay, so that is number 1 of our 7 wonders. The Jews are going to be an eternal people. That's what the Torah says, that's what we're experiencing. Now, if we were writing the Torah, and we predict that these people are going to be an eternal people, so then, why would we expect this nation from all the others to stick around forever? Forever is a really long time. So let's try to come up with a strategy, a game plan. How are we going to create an eternal nation? So I would think if you put them on an isolated island, out of the way, they mind their own business. And in the olden days before the F-16, it's very hard to conquer an island, so maybe the Jews can squeak around for an eternity. And in fact, there is a nation in the Far East, a little island. They've been around for a very long time, and that is the country of Japan. Thank you. Japan. And that's the secret of the Japanese. But we know that that's not the Jewish secret. We are not on the island of Japan. Here we are in the Middle East, with a land bridge that connects 3 continents. We're between Africa and Asia and Europe. Land bridge connecting 3 continents. Fertile Crescent. This is Grand Central Station. We control the trade routes. This is a very valuable piece of real estate. So why would the author of the Torah expect to plop the Jews down, right smack center in the Middle East, and expect them to stick around for eternity? What's going to stop the neighboring nations from just throwing them into the sea? So I would expect, if we're not in Japan, that the Torah will give us a very strong army. And if the Torah predicts a very strong army, and if we somehow can come up with a very strong army, then we can stick around for eternity. Look at quote number 4. The Torah talks about the strength of the biblical Jewish army that's going to ensure Jewish survival for eternity. The Torah says, again, I'm reading the underlined parts, the Torah does not give the Jews a fighting chance. The Jews are going to be exiled from the land of Israel. If that's not enough, look at the next pasuk. Hashem will scatter us throughout the nations. Exile and dispersion. The author of the Torah, that's not very conducive to being an eternal nation. You're going to kick us out of our land and scatter us throughout the nations? That will help us be swallowed up by the nations, either be persecuted by the nations, be wiped out, or assimilate among the nations and become one of them. How are you expecting the Jews to become an eternal nation? It doesn't make any sense. And this is wonder number 2. The exile and dispersion. Okay, the Jews, we predict, will be an eternal nation, yet they will be exiled, dispersed throughout the land. Okay? Let's come up with something else, a backup plan. If they are dispersed throughout the land, what's going to stop them from disappearing? By the way, has this come true? Have the Jews been exiled and dispersed? We know we've been exiled. Have we been dispersed throughout the land? So if you're in a Tivari, you might think that all the Jews live in Teaneck, all the 5 towns. But the truth is that there are also Jews in Flatbush. My wife teaches in the seminary, and a girl was crying, being she was having a very rough time. And my wife said, what's wrong? What's wrong? She said, I've never met anyone who wasn't from Flatbush before. I don't know what to do with myself. But aside from Flatbush, 5 towns in Teaneck, there might be some guys here from England here. Anyway, there is nowhere throughout the globe, except for Gush Katif, where there are no Jews. And yet we're still here. Okay, so how are we going to expect and predict that the Jews are going to be an eternal nation? Now, there are animals that are in danger of extinction, and we have rules and regulations. Who, what, when, where, and why you're allowed to catch them and hunt them and eat them. So maybe the Torah is going to prescribe a very, very special preferential treatment for the Jews, treat them with kid gloves, something that's going to ensure Jewish survival forever, despite the fact that they're exiled and dispersed throughout the land. If you look at quote number 5, quote number 5 from the end of Dvarim, and we're going to bring a number of quotes to the end of Dvarim. There are 2 tochachas. 2 times that Moshe rebukes the Jewish people, tells us to behave or else. One is at the end of Vayikra, and the other at the end of Dvarim. And at the end of Dvarim, in quote number 5, the Torah tells us the extra special preferential treatment that we are going to experience in the diaspora. Quote number 5, when they are scattered throughout the Goyim, lo sagia, lo yamanoach, lekaf raglecha, the Jews are going to be terribly persecuted and tormented. Terrible, extreme persecution. Torah continues, it goes on and on and on and on. We have here under the Fachad Tzalala V'yomam, Lo Tamid B'chayecha, you're not going to believe in your life, you're going to be scared day and night, you're going to wish it was day, you're going to wish it was night. Jews are going to experience extreme, intense persecution. Well, author of the Torah, that doesn't make any sense. You tell us that they're going to be a general nation, yet you're kicking them out of their land, scattering them throughout the globe, and then you tell us that they're going to experience extreme and intense anti-Semitism and persecution. What's going to stop them from disappearing? That doesn't make any sense. They're just going to be wiped out, finished, goodbye. What is the author of the Torah thinking? This is wonder number 3, this terrible anti-Semitism. Have we experienced this? For sure. From the Crusades to the Inquisition, pogroms, blood libels, Holocaust, you name it, we've experienced it. If you think about anti-Semitism, you guys are going to Poland, some of you? End of the year?
Yes.
What's that called? Heritage?
Yes.
Okay. If you think about what went on, you can't even think about it. What is 6 million? So I can understand if I have a Jewish competitor and he's bothering my business, I can understand it's not right, it's not nice. You know, you might want to take care of that Jewish competitor. But to take truckloads of women and children and gas them to death because their last name is Goldberg is something that defies all logic. It makes no sense. And it really gives a lot of credibility to the Holocaust deniers because it's such a crazy thing. Who would believe, who would imagine Germany, the most advanced country, with their doctors and their lawyers and their scientists and their professors, would take millions and millions and millions of Jews and kill them for what reason? Because they're Jewish. It's something so hard for us to understand. The truth is that this has a lot of meaning specifically to me. My name is ravthale. I'm named after my grandfather. My father was born in Belgium, May 13th, 1940. Hitler invaded Belgium, May 10th, 1940. And my grandmother and her sister, with their sons, as my father, as an infant, they separated from their husbands. They found someone to smuggle women and children into Switzerland. So my grandmother and her sister, my father, they survived. And the brothers-in-law were caught by the French police, sent to the Nazis, sent to Auschwitz. My grandfather made it till the end, and he died on a death march from Auschwitz. So this has always had specific meaning to me. But I don't ask the question that other people like to ask. People like to ask, why the Holocaust? Why were so many people killed? I like to ask a different question. Why was I saved? Why am I here? You're all a generation younger than me. It's probably not your grandparents, but your great-grandparents. Many of them probably survived the Holocaust while the rest of their families were wiped out. Why are we here? And I've always thought that maybe Hashem has something in mind for me. Maybe I should become more than just a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. There's nothing wrong with becoming a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. But maybe Hashem has something more in mind for us. Maybe Hashem is expecting us to do something even better. Now, even if your great-grandparents were not in Europe and did not survive the war, or you're Sephardi and therefore you were not affected perhaps by the Holocaust, if we're Jewish today, and we know that we're Jewish today, even if we happen to be Balei Tshuva, there's no doubt that our great-great-grandparents, and before that, all of our ancestors have sacrificed tremendous, tremendous things for their Judaism. And it's always bothered me. Why did Judaism mean so much to them and mean so little to us? And I think this is a question that we all need to ask ourselves. Why did Judaism mean so much to our ancestors and to us it means so little? Again, one of the questions that we ask at the beginning is, if human beings are writing this Torah, So they should be writing something that makes sense. It doesn't make sense to predict that they're going to be an eternal nation and at the same time tell us they're going to be exiled, dispersed throughout the world, and experience terrible anti-Semitism. Even more difficult to understand is if we're starting this religion from scratch, and this is our document, this is our country club, these are the rules and regulations of our country club, why would you put in the Torah all the horrible, terrible, horrific things that are going to befall the Jewish people if they don't follow your rules and regulations? Who's going to want to join this group of people? Now, we believe that Hashem appeared to the entire Jewish people, men, women, and children. I think you heard a class on this already today. As opposed to the Muslims and the Christians and all the other religions, where one guy woke up one morning and decided that God spoke to him, and he went out to convince the world the Jews are the only nation, the only religion in the entire world, ever was and never will be, that makes the claim that God appeared to the entire nation, men, women, and children. That means God does not need to impress us. He does not need to draw adherents to his religion. We saw 10 Makkos. We saw Yetzias Mitzrayim. We saw Kriyas Yamsuf. We saw Ma'amad Har Sinai. Now Hashem is shortened to the point. I'm in charge. You have to do what I say. If you don't, I'm going to give you the following punishments. A to Z. Oh, but it's not an effective advertising campaign. God does not need an advertising campaign. The Jews experience God. They know the truth. Now they need a kick in the pants to do what's right. But if human beings are starting religion, the Jews saw no miracles. So the Jews, you have to have something that's going to convince people to join this religion. What's written in the Torah, persecution after persecution after persecution, is not going to bring anyone into your religion. It's going to scare everybody away. There is no reason, and it does not make any sense whatsoever, why a human being would write such a thing in his Torah. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. The Torah tells us we're going to be eternal nation, exiled, dispersed throughout the world, terribly persecuted, all through the Torah. Now, even if someone thinks that a human being wrote the Torah, everyone agrees it wasn't written by idiots. So it has to make sense. So how are you expecting them to be an eternal nation? I got it. There are two countries in Asia, aside from Japan, that have been around for a really, really long time. They are China and India. China and India, great. Let's find the secret of their success and we'll tag along. What is the secret of their success? How has China and India managed to stick around for such a long time? They're isolated? I don't know if they're isolated. Okay, they have a wall. How many Chinese and Indians are there in the world? Okay, there are a lot. There are around 1.3 billion Chinese and over 1 billion Indians. That's like more than 1/3 of the world's population is either Chinese or Indian. So we can understand how they've stuck around for such a long time. I got it. The Jews are going to be so huge that when they go from country to country, they're just going to swallow up country after country after country. And that's how we can understand it. Now the Jews are going to stick around despite being exiled, dispersed throughout the world, because there's going to be 35 Jewish countries, and they're going to swallow up everyone else. Boom, the Jews are here forever. Let's see what the Torah tells us about the numbers of the Jewish people. If you look at number 6, the pasuk tells us also at the end of Dvarim in the Tochacha, "V'nish'artem b'nasei ma'at." The Jews are going to be few in number. Few in number? Author of the Torah, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. This is the recipe for annihilation and extinction. You're expecting them to stick around forever? Exiled, dispersed throughout the world, terribly persecuted, and few in number? That's outrageous. That makes it absurd. It makes no sense. How are you expecting this nation to stick around? Now there is a big machlokes, who is a Jew and how many Jews there are in the world, but there are approximately 13, 15 million Jews out of 6 or 7 billion people. That's a very, very, very small percentage, like 1/4 or 1% maybe. So author of the Torah How are you expecting this nation to stick around for eternity? This doesn't make any sense. This is telling us why they're going to disappear. You want to know why they're going to disappear? I'll tell you why. They're going to be exiled, they're going to be dispersed, they're going to be persecuted. Few in number, boom, goodbye. But the Torah tells us that they're going to be eternal. Now we know from 1940 to 1945, we lost 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. We understand that. If you look at the statistics, what's even more frightening perhaps is that between 1975 and 1995, we lost more than 1.1 million Jews. Who was gassing Jews to death between 75 and 95 that we would lose more than 1 million Jews? Assimilation. Intermarriage, assimilation. For years, our enemies have been doing it to us, and now we're doing it to ourselves. What a tragedy. Now, I once gave this talk to a secular audience, and the guy said, "Ha ha, I got you, Rabbi. God wants me to marry my girlfriend, Christina. Look, few in number. I'm going to help God with his plan. I'm going to marry Christina, my kids will be goyim, and won't replace itself, and I'm going to help God with his master plan that there should be fewer Jews in the world." It's a good lump. It's a big Talmud. So we know from the parashiyos that we're reading, Hashem tells Abraham in the Bris Bein Abasarim, the Jews are going to be enslaved. The Eretz Lo Lahem. The Jews are going to be enslaved. Was it part of God's master plan that the Jews be enslaved? Yes. Hashem said the Jews will be enslaved. Right? This is the very famous question. So Paro volunteered to do God's will. Why was Paro punished? Okay? So the famous answer, there are many answers. One of the answers that's given is Hashem did not tell Paro to enslave the Jews. Hashem did not say the Jews will be enslaved in Egypt. Hashem said the Eretz Lo Lahem, in a foreign land. We all have free will, B'chir Chavshis, to choose to do what you want. And basically there are two teams. There's Moshe's team and Paro's team. We are supposed to choose Moshe's team. You have free will. You can choose Paro's team, but you will suffer for that decision for all of eternity. So yes, you can choose the fewer number team. You can marry Christina, have a few goyish babies, and try to convince God after 120 that you followed his will. But Hashem takes all of our decision and manipulates history, so in the end, Hashem wins. It's our job to pick the winning team. The Jews are going to be the eternal nation, as God dispersed throughout the world, terribly persecuted, all the while few in number. What would we expect the impact of this nation to have on society? So I would expect zero. I would expect he disappeared. No one ever heard of the Jews. We have Hitler's museum of what a Jew used to look like, and there are no Jews left. And if we could quantify it, and there are still Jews left, okay, there are a few Jews, so let's quantify it. If the Jews are approximately 1/4% of the world's population, so we would say the impact of the Jews perhaps would be 1/4% of impact on humanity. Now I want to discuss two impacts that the Jews have had on society. One is the impact of the Jews, and the other is the Jewish impact. Okay? When I say Jewish impact, I mean through Judaism. When I say impact to the Jews, I mean outside of the realm of Judaism. Outside of the realm of Judaism, how have Jews impacted the world in general? So let's start with the impact of the Jews outside of Judaism. So, I've not updated my statistics, but when I started teaching this class in 2004, there were 760 Nobel Prize winners. How many of those would we expect to be Jewish? Well, if 1/4% of the world's population, if you round up, I think you get to 2. Anyone want to give a number? How many, again, it stops at 2004, how many Jewish Nobel Prize winners were there between 1901 and 2004? 26. You're over. Price is right. You're over your ass. 167. Okay? 167 is 22% of 760. That means we're 1/4 of 1% of the world's population with 22% of the Nobel Prizes. That's 88 times what the statistics would indicate. Now, what I find interesting, the Nobel Prize started in 1901. If you look back at Mark Twain, who died at the beginning of the 1900s, and he wrote his article at the turn of the 20th century. Mark Twain, since we read 3 and 4, now we'll do 1 and 2. If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous, dim puff of stardust, lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of. But he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people. And his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. Mark Twain is telling us, okay, in the century before what the Nobel Prize statistics told us, that the Jews have had a tremendous impact on society. Now that is the impact that the Jews have had outside of Torah, outside of Judaism. Let's discuss the Jewish impact through Judaism and through Torah. So we know that Abraham was the first monotheistic Jew in the world. The world was paganistic, polytheistic. They bowed down to stuffed animals. And Abraham introduced monotheism to the world. What's the big deal? We believe monotheism, as we understand it, Hashem created every human being in the image of God, and therefore we are expected to act accordingly. The Torah tells us in many places to imitate God. And the Gemara explains this in a couple of ways. One is more generally, just like God is merciful and compassionate, we are expected and commanded to be merciful and compassionate. And there are specific laws. Hashem was Mevaker Chola, we are expected to be Mevaker Chola. When was Hashem Mevaker Chola? Avram Avinu, 3rd day of his Milah, Hashem himself goes to visit him. Avram dies, Yitzchak sitting Shiva, Hashem goes to console mourners, and we are expected and commanded to do Bikur Chola, Nicham Avelim, mitzvahs that we learn out from these psukim of following in the ways of Hashem. Christianity and Islam, which make up most of the world today, is built on the foundations of Judaism. What they call the Judeo-Christian ethic is all nonsense. Christianity all came from the Torah, all came from Judaism. The founding fathers of the United States of America, all the morals and ethics that we appreciate coming from Western civilization, all comes from the Jews and from our Torah. Despite, as Mark Twain said, our hands tied behind the back, despite our being a tiny fraction of the population. And this is exactly what the Torah tells us. Look at quote number 7, Yeshaya Navi, to be an or lagoyim, to be a light unto the nations. This is what the Torah tells us. But it doesn't make any sense. They're going to be few in number, Torah persecuted. What's the chances that they're going to be impacting society? Yet the Torah tells us that they're going to have a tremendous impact. And this is exactly what we've seen. People think that morals and ethics came from the Greeks and the Romans. That is the furthest thing from the truth. The Greeks and Romans used to have a practice called infanticide. Infanticide is killing infants. Why would they kill their infants? The baby was sick, they didn't want to deal with the baby. Too many people in the world, population control. Aristotle said it's not healthy for there to be so many people. It's harder to kill your 18-year-old son, so kill the baby. Or, this is my favorite, he wants a boy, he wants to play basketball. You can't play ball with a girl. So if it's a girl, get rid of her. And in fact, in Biblical Archaeology Review, July 1991, they found a letter from a Roman officer to his pregnant wife. If you give birth before I come back, if it's a girl, get rid of her. If it's a boy, keep him. That was the morals and ethics of the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans. All the ethics that we have today, that Western civilization has, all comes from the Jewish Torah. There's a beautiful letter from John Adams, the second president of the United States, where he writes that the Hebrews, that's us, have the more civilized men than any other nation. We've had tremendous impact through our Torah, without the Torah, in secular areas and everything. And this is what the Torah tells us. The Jews are going to be in Or L'Goyim. It's actually a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara Pesachim Adaf Pezayin. The Gemara asks, why were the Jews sent into Galus? The Gemara answers, to increase Gerim. So we will bring in converts. And I read this Gemara, I was very bothered. First of all, we know why the Jews were sent into Galus, because either sin aschinam, or they violated the 3 cardinal sins, the big 3. What does the Gemara mean? Why were the Jews exiled? And what does it mean to bring in converts? We don't look for converts, we chase converts away. So I think it's the Maharsha over there who explains what the Gemara is asking. We know that the Jews were exiled because of their sins. What the Gemara is asking is, Hashem can punish the Jews in many, many ways. Why did he specifically pick a punishment of exile and dispersion? And the answer is to have more Gerim, more converts. It doesn't mean converts as we know it, someone who converts and becomes Jewish. It doesn't mean Ger Tzedek, it means a Ger Tosha, that we will teach the world about monotheism. And that's exactly what happened. I found this very interesting because the reason we were exiled, the reason the first base of English was destroyed, the Gemara in Yuma tells us, is because the Jews violated the 3 cardinal sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder. So you take the people that are not ethical, and are not moral, and are not monotheistic, and you're scattering them throughout the world to teach the world about monotheism. How is that supposed to work? I don't know. But that's what the Torah says is going to happen, and that is exactly what Jewish history has shown us. The author of the Torah again tells us the Jews are going to be eternal nation. Nonetheless, they're going to be exiled, dispersed, terribly persecuted, all while few in number. Tremendous impact on society as well. Now, wonder number 6 is inherently contradictory. The Torah tells us in Shmos, Hashem is going to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim and bring them into the land of Israel, which is described as Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. There are quotes from Josephus, who lived at the time of the Romans 2,000 years ago, who talks about the Fertile Crescent and the land of Israel, in fact, flowing with milk and honey. The Torah then goes on to tell us something ridiculous. The Torah tells us that the land flowing with milk and honey is only flowing with milk and honey when the Jews are there. But when the Jews are exiled and kicked out of the land is going to shut down. That is absurd. It's ridiculous. That's what the Torah says. Now there's a famous quote from Mark Twain, 1867. I don't think we have it here. We don't have it here, but there's a famous quote from Mark Twain. He came to visit Israel. He came on a trip. And lahavdil elef alfei avdolos. There's a quote 600 years earlier from the Ramban. Lahavdil, lahavdil, lahavdil. And they both say the same thing. They talk about how the land is a wasteland and everyone tries to work the land, but to no avail. They cannot get anything to grow in this piece of land. This is what the Torah predicts for us thousands of years ago, and this is what Jewish history has shown us. And this is something that is absolutely mind-boggling. Imagine predicting that the amber waves of grain of North American soil will only produce for the Indians. But when white European man kicks out the Indians, the land's going to shut down. No one ever said that. No one would say that. It doesn't make any sense. It didn't happen. It wouldn't happen. It couldn't happen. The land of Israel is different. The Torah tells us the land is going to shut down. Jewish history tells us that the land, in fact, shut down. This is wonder 6. That the land and the people are dependent. The land is dependent on the people. When the Jews are here, the land produces. When the Jews are not, the land shuts down. Now, what's wild about this prediction is, if you're predicting that the Jews are going to be kicked out of the land, like why would someone want to kick out Jews from the land of Israel? Is there any reason for that? Sure. We said it's a very valuable piece of real estate. It's the Middle East. Controls the trade routes, the Fertile Crescent, land bridge, connecting 3 continents. This is a great piece of real estate. So we would expect someone to try to kick out the Jews. And we're predicting that they're going to successfully kick the Jews out. So aren't you going to want to take over that piece of land? If you take over, what are you going to eat? What business are you? Are you going to work in high tech? Intel? Apple? What are you going to do here? You're going to work in agriculture. How are you going to eat? How are you going to survive? Yet the Torah tells us the land will not produce, and that's exactly what happened. In a quote from the Ramban tells us that this is good news for the Jews. This is our proof that the land of Israel is reserved for the Jewish people. When we're here, it produces. When we leave, it shuts down. And this brings us into wonder number 7. As we well know, today, the land of Israel is far from shut down. Israel is a major exporter of produce all over the world. If you buy flowers for your mother and they die in 3 days, because the good flowers go to Europe and we're left with the junk. But you can buy Jaffa oranges all over the world. Israel's a major exporter of produce. When the Jews came back to the land of Israel, the land, once again, 70 years ago, picked up and started producing again. And that is wonder number 7. Wonder number 7 is that the Torah, after the whole Tochacha and all the terrible trials and tribulations that the Jews are going to experience in Golus, in the exile, if they don't do what Hashem tells us to do, the Torah tells us that the Jews are going to return to the land of Israel. That is crazy. Now you go on heritage, and some of you probably have great-grandparents who lived in Warsaw or Krakow. I never heard, I happened to teach in Tibaria for 13 years, even though it's only 11 years old. And I never heard of a guy come back from heritage and say, oh, I really want to go back and move to Krakow or Warsaw because that's where my great-great-grandmother is from. No one ever said that. No one ever said that in the history of the Tibaria's heritage trips. So why would you expect the Jews to come back to the land of Israel hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after they're kicked out? The Torah tells us at the end, the Jews are going to return to the land of Israel. Now those of us who were born like 20 years ago might find that to be not such a big deal. But if you look at the statistics, in the year 1800, less than 1% of world Jewry was living in the land of Israel. In fact, the Reformed Jews proudly proclaimed, Germany is our fatherland, Berlin is our Jerusalem, most of world Jewry are in Eastern Europe. We have to take every mention of Zion and Jerusalem from the Siddur and cross it out. That quote from the end of Dvarim, the Jews are going to come back, it's nonsense, anyway we don't believe in Torah, so what's the big deal? The Jews, here we are, comfy, cozy Germany, and must be here to stay. The Torah says we should go back to Israel, not even 1% of world Jewry in Israel, that's absurd, that's ridiculous. We know how wrong they were. Even 1933, 2% of world Jewry was living in the land of Israel. Today, we are approaching close to 50% of world Jewry living in the land of Israel. When that happens, there may be halachic ramifications, speak to your Rebbe. But for the first time since Bayis Rishon, in over 2,500 years, there are well over 40 to 45% of Jews living in the land of Israel. When I was growing up in the States, there were 3 million Jews in Israel and 6 million Jews in the United States of America. There are now more Jews living in Israel than any other country in the world. A lot of assimilation, a little immigration. There are more Jews now in Israel than there are in the States. And there are almost as many Jews living in Israel as any other country in the world put together. This is exactly what the Torah tells us is going to happen. Okay, it's ridiculous. It was ridiculous 100 years ago. It was ridiculous 200 years ago. And you can imagine thousands of years ago to predict the Jews are going to be kicked out, scattered throughout the world, yet they're going to want to come back, and they're going to come back. Like, why would you want to come back? Why would you want to come back? Okay, you were born there. Let's say they take all the inhabitants of Canada and they parachute them throughout the world. Are they going to want to go back home? Yes. Their children? Probably. The grandchildren? Doubtful. Great-grandchildren? Great-great-great-great-great-great-great? Why would you expect the Jews to want to go back? And we are living in miraculous times. Jews are coming back to the land of Israel by the plane load. This is it's a wild miracle. It's incredible. It's beyond belief that the Torah would predict such a thing. The Torah did predict it, and we have the privilege of living at a time. We are living at an incredible time in Jewish history. If we were giving this class 75 years ago, we would present the 5.5 wonders of Jewish history. We couldn't prove the return of the Jews to Israel. We couldn't prove that when the Jews came back, the land of Israel would once again give off produce. We're living in incredible times that we have to appreciate. God's talking to us. We have to listen. Let's summarize. The Jews are living in the land of Israel. They are exiled, dispersed throughout the world, terribly persecuted all the while. Few number. Nonetheless, tremendous impact on society against all odds. When the Jews are in the land of Israel, the land is very fruitful. When the Jews are kicked out, the land shuts down. The Jews come back, the land once again picks up and starts to produce. 1900 years after the Jews, the last exile, the Jews are on their way back to the land of Israel. Wonder of all wonders, all of this was predicted in the Torah thousands of years ago. How are we to understand this? Guys, give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes, we're done. If human beings are writing the Torah, we have 3 questions. 1, why would you make these ridiculous predictions that are contradictory and make no sense? 2, if you're going to predict this, how are you going to make sure that this is actually what happens? And 3, we spoke about the advertising campaign. If you're human beings starting the Jewish religion on this document, why would you put such horrific predictions in your document? No one's going to want to join this group of people. If a human being is writing the Torah, we're left with 3 questions. But if we understand that the author of the Torah is also the author of history, then all the questions fall away. And we can now better understand Mark Twain's question. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Thank you for listening. Question.
What else is predicted in the Torah?
What else is predicted in the Torah?
Come back next year.
According to many, predicted in the Torah that the Jews are going to come back. And we are experiencing about Tshuva movement, the likes of which we haven't needed, and the likes of which we haven't seen ever. We know that we're waiting for Mashiach. We can't, we're still waiting for that. But you see, we're almost at 50% of Jews. The land of Israel is rebuilt. We're waiting for Mashiach to finish the job. Yes?
One question regarding before, you.
Yes.
Is that not part of the Torah, and should be considered as more of a prediction? And
Say it again.
Being that is part of the Torah, should we not consider it as more of a prediction? And is Abraham not told by God that we'll be more plentiful than the stars of the sand?
Excellent. That's a great question. Very good. I get that. Okay, your roommate asked a great question. So I wanted to answer that question by the continuation of the pasuk. The pasuk says, you're going to be few in number. Look at number 6. Kilo shamata b'kol Hashem l'kecha. Because you didn't listen to Hashem. If you would have listened to Hashem, you would have been greater in number, like Abram was told. That's what I wanted to answer. I brought this question to Ravthale, and he disagreed with me. Ravthale said that the prediction to Abraham is not at one given point in time. It means Abraham as one individual, you count up all the Jews who lived from the time of Abraham until today, you get to billions of people. But it doesn't mean at one given point in time, they're going to be billions of Jews. So the Jews at any one point in time, if they're not behaving and the Torah is taking effect, they'll be few in number. But that doesn't remove the fact that from the time of Abraham until today, you have 5,000 years, let's say, 4,000 years, you had a lot of Jews. Yes?
You said they accepted the Torah.
They accepted the Torah?
Or the people accepted the Torah, which the Torah itself wasn't in it.
Okay.
So didn't we say not that much, but we didn't even know what was in it? So we accepted it, we didn't know what was in it.
My point is that if you are human beings writing the Torah, creating a religion, right? So then you're going to want to put in your document things that are going to want, people are going to want to join your group of people. You're going to get a beautiful home on the beach. You can have 3 cars, 2 boats, a summer home, a winter home, a spring home, and a fall home. To put in the Torah awful things that are going to scare people away, if we said not to finish, and you believe in Har Sinai, then you don't need this. This is to explain why it's illogical to say anything else. So you're proving our point. Thank you. Yes?
Throughout history, there's been many religions, polytheistic, not many monotheists, there are many other religions that have fallen by the wayside.
Yes.
And when we view their doctrines now in history, we go back and we see the lies that are written in them. And we can question not why, because the people aren't around anymore. So the writer, the author of the Torah could have assumed that if the Jews would die out because of the anti-assimilation, anti-Semitism, few number, whatever it is.
There's no one left for the money back guarantee because the Jews disappeared. Good. Great. So the Torah we know is not just written for the Jews. The Torah has Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. The Torah was written for all of humanity, all mankind. Right? We have Payag mitzvahs for the Jews among us. We have 7 mitzvahs for those who are not. We don't believe in missionizing. Everyone has to become Jewish. No. You're a guy, stay a guy, become someone. I heard a great quote. It's better to be a good guy than a bad Jew. Stay a good guy, do what you're supposed to do. The Torah was written for everybody, for all of mankind. It wasn't just written for the Jews. Yes?
What were those ramifications that you were saying? If there were more than 50% that would be in Israel? More than 50%?
Consult your local Orthodox Maggid Shir. Yes?
Do you have an example of another religion's prophecy that has been debunked over time?
I do Judaism. Okay, thanks for listening, guys.